Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Coulter. I'm the CEO of Raymond James in Canada, and I'm joined today by Scott Hudson, Executive Vice President and Head of Wealth Management at Raymond James here. Scott, welcome and thank you.
Hey, thanks, Jamie. Great to be with you.
I'm looking forward to exploring this topic in particular, and that is really diving into different business models for advisors and the pros and cons of each. I know you and I have been in conversations with advisors both here at Raymond James and at other entities, and sort of helping them navigate the differences between the platforms is an excellent exercise, and probably one that doesn't get quite enough attention. So we're hoping to help folks with that with our discussion today. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into it here and get us going to look into the different business models. And so, if you look across Canada's wealth management industry today, we know that advisors have several business model options they can choose, they can structure, and they can operate their advisory business within those. And yet, I think one thing we both agree over the years we've seen is that not all advisors are aware of the full range of options that are open to them today. So can you, as a sort of starting point, can you provide a brief overview of our different business models and some of the key characteristics of each?
Yeah, there are a lot of different models, and so it can get a little confusing. I think about it in terms of models being split sort of in two different ways or along two lines. So one is sort of regulatory or licensing requirements and how things operate that way. And the other is really kind of the amount of independence or decision-making control an advisor has in the business. So, from a regulatory perspective, you're really looking at sort of CIRO, the new IIROC, MFDA amalgamated regulator. So regulated versus through CIRO versus CSA regulated portfolio managers, like the traditional investment counselor business. Yeah. And those are sort of the primary two lines that we see alignment across. To a retail client, these are often, indistinguishable, looking more and more like each other all the time as those models continue to merge together over time. But the licensing requirements are still different. And so there are some regulatory differences that exist. So for example, a provincially regulated PM would only use fee-based accounts, where a CIRO regulated PM could use fee-based accounts or commission-based accounts in their business. So there are some differences that exist between those two things, but not like what they used to be and not major. The other point of differentiation in terms of the models is around that sort of control of decision making. I think of it as almost a continuum of independence or control and decision making on the business, starting with sort of the corporate or employee model, which would be what you would typically have, kind of large branch in a major urban center where the advisors are employees of the firm. This is the bank full service brokerage firms all operate in this model, and that's kind of typical for that. The next step along that continuum is an independent agent who is not an employee of the firm. The lead agent would run a management company, and then the team, all the other people on the team are employees of that management company. They might be in a major urban center. They might be in a different market, a smaller market. And it could be a single advisor agency. It could be multiple advisors working together in one agency. It encapsulates a lot of different things, but more control and more independence relative to decision making in terms of what you do and how you do it. And then the third is really where you're running your own firm, and it's totally separate. You're a registrant running your own firm, contracting out to someone else for custody, clearing, other services that you want to offer your clients, but it's kind of your name, your firm that you're running.
I think that's great how you've broken that down into the two kind of axes, almost, if you will, and the regulatory element to it, and then the degree of independence. That's a very helpful framework. And you sort of twigged on it a little bit. We probably won't go too far into it today, but I am curious to see how the regulatory environment sort of evolves over the course of time. As you mentioned earlier, IIROC and MFDA combined to form a new entity, the acronym CIRO, and they're sort of only 6 months into their existence, so they're kind of just getting going. It will be interesting to see if how, at least from the regulatory perspective, whether or not these two different models actually converge over the course of time. I think though the models from, at least from a ownership perspective, those differences will probably persist.
Yeah, I mean, there's work being done there. To your point, the MFDA old IROC worlds are going to come together over time, and CIRO's kind of laid out a roadmap for that over the next couple of years, at least sort of some of their key priorities. And to your point, I would think that the provincial regulated PM firms, there still needs to be more consolidation of regulation there. Again, from a client perspective, from a typical retail client perspective, they don't even know these differences exist, can't perceive the difference. It would be difficult, frankly, to explain these things to somebody that's not in the business and knows the nuances of the different business lines. And so if from a client perspective, it doesn't matter, then we might as well streamline that from an industry perspective.
Sometimes it's hard to explain it to those in the industry.
Yes, indeed, which is why we're having this call.
Exactly. Well, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that. So one thing that we've seen, and sort of not sure if it's COVID related or not, but it seems to have sort of accelerated over the last couple of years. And that is this idea of advisors who, built their career in one business model, then they make a switch to another. So that switch can be daunting. And, the obvious one that we've seen a few times is switching from being an employee advisor to an independent agent. Could you just, from the experience, particularly the last couple of years, share some insights into why advisors might choose to make that switch, and at the same time, implications for their business?
Yeah. So part of it depends on where they're coming from. If they're coming from an outside firm, if they're coming from, within Raymond James and moving within models within Raymond James, the factors can be a little bit different. But ultimately, I think it really comes down to a trade-off between two kind of important but conflicting factors. So one is, how much decision-making control does an advisor want to have in the business, balanced off against how much time the advisor is willing to invest working on the business, rather than being in front of clients, engaging in client relationships and doing that important work that often is the reason advisors got into the business in the first place. So those two things are in conflict. And you see advisors working through kind of the trade-offs to find what's the right spot for them. And of course, it can change over time too, right? It's not static, things do evolve. So, that continuum of independence, if you think about how advisors want to structure their team, right? Who they hire, when they hire, what you pay, et cetera. In a corporate employee model, your firm might have a view on how those things work, or policies around, guideposts around how those work, and what you need to operate in to be able to do that. If you're running your own firm, you're in complete control of those things and have the ability to have more flexibility around them. We see people making decisions around the look and feel of their office, their real estate. Corporate offices tend to have a sort of standard look and feel. If you want your office in a different part of town, or control of the, when the carpet gets replaced and what it looks like, you get that with the independent model. But you pick your own real estate. It means you also have responsibility for that real estate. If there's a water leak, you're the one dealing with getting it resolved. Even though you might have a client meeting in the next 15 minutes, that's back to you and on you. So again, it's that conflict. Team structure builds into that. Corporate offices have models for, when you can hire an associate, again, what compensation looks like. There's more, with more independence comes more flexibility on those types of things. Compensation is a factor because it's different in the different models. Towards more independence, obviously more compensation, but also more expenses that attribute back to the advisor as well. So those things need to be considered and factored in. Succession planning can be a factor sometimes, Jamie, for teams, right? We see that more and more. You might have more control over your successor as you move from a corporate model to a more independent model, depending on where you're coming from. If the corporate model is involved in kind of what a successor can look like. But you also need to locate your successors for yourself. If you're in a corporate office, you've typically got a floor of other advisors where you can sort of engage with people, maybe form a team over time, sell your business. And that can be a little bit more challenging to do as you become more independent, because you've got to source that partner yourself and try and figure out if they're going to be right and the right fit. And all those things. And the other thing I think that's an important consideration, again, depending on where you're coming from, book ownership can be a massive consideration as you move from sort of the employee corporate model towards a more independent move. And every firm's a bit different, but generally speaking, there's greater control of client ownership as you move to more independence. And that is, I think, a major factor that advisors consider when they're thinking about sort of shifting off these models. But the trade-off ultimately is sort of control versus time. Advisors in our Raymond James corporate model would say they want to spend 100% of their time focused on their client relationships and leave the office challenges to someone else. When the water leaks, when the scanner's broken, whatever, that's, you make a call and you go on to your next client meeting and keep going. Advisors in our independent model would say they're happy to invest that time to be able to have more influence over the real estate, the technology, the human resources, those types of things. So, it's where you want to spend your time and energy on the business, and kind of how important those trade-offs are for you.
That's a really good summary. And so there's, I think, as you framed it, there's a mix of quantitative and qualitative elements that need to be factored when you make this when an advisor makes this decision. And so the financial element is an important one, but there are other factors to work into the decision making. Thanks for highlighting all of those. And again, as you said, that trade-off, between control and time, and just kind of mapping that out is going to be important. I think where we've probably had some good success with assisting advisors make these decisions is go talk to somebody who's already done it, and ask them what were the positive surprises and what were the negative surprises that came out of that out of that move.
Yeah, those conversations are enlightening. As always, the advisor to advisor conversations are the most helpful. You get the good, the bad, and the ugly, and with total candor, which is what you need before you step into a decision like that, so you know exactly what you're walking towards.
So at Raymond James today, we offer a full range of business model options for advisors, and we're certainly supportive of those who choose to switch to a new business model. And as we were just alluding to a moment ago, we've seen that happen a few times over the last couple of years, and some of it, I think, actually may in fact have been driven by the COVID work from home experience. So we're sort of settling into a bit of a new post-COVID paradigm, and I think we're all trying to find our feet under that one. Regardless, from your perspective, what are the key factors advisors should consider when assessing the best fit for their business? So it's a little different question than the one I asked earlier. Yeah,
there is a lot that goes into it, and I think it depends on the starting point of kind of where you're coming from and what you're looking to do in your business. And like we talked about earlier, things can evolve over time. So it's one of the things that I think is an important consideration is to make sure that whatever you're deciding, whatever you're moving towards, there is actually lots of flexibility there, that you're sort of playing the long game and giving yourself the opportunity to adapt over time based on your business needs, based on the regulatory environment, whatever, as these things evolve over time, that you've got sort of optionality to be able to do different things with your business and have it make sense in the least disruptive way possible. Your point earlier about talking to other advisors, I think, is a good one. Due diligence is really, really important here. I think we see, you talked about this kind of the moves we've seen over the last few years, and we've certainly seen that from our parent in the US as well. Just sort of this general migration in the business towards more independent models, and the advisors wanting to make sure they've got book ownership and full independence as a consideration for what they're doing. So I think it is important to talk to advisors in multiple models, advisors that have made that move, and make sure that people have all the facts, they haven't missed any sort of decisions or key points, that they myth bust a little bit on some of the stuff they think might be true, or or believe to be true, or even some of the things that maybe they're not considering.
Yeah.
And we try and do that too a little bit. We do work with advisors before they make a move like this to make sure they're sort of fully eyes wide open. For example, advisors moving from a corporate to an independent agent model. If you're moving your full team over, you need to set up a benefit plan for that team.
Yes.
If they have, dental and medical benefits today, they're going to want to see those replicated in an independent model. And those kinds of things often get forgotten. If you're moving people from a pension plan or a group RSP with matching contributions, you're going to want to replicate those things for your team in a independent model. And those are often some of the things that come up where people just haven't considered those pieces and need to understand kind of what they're going to do there, how to make that happen, what the costs are, and make sure they're factoring those things into their decision making. So there's really a lot to consider. Your point around us offering multiple models, multiple options for advisors with the ability to move between them over time, and having experience with advisors making that moves, I think is quite helpful. It's really an important part of our business and the model in our business. We believe that every advisor owns their business, so we're not dictating how they should run it. We kind of offer the options up and let advisors pick and settle where it's best for them, and have the flexibility to change over time as they see fit. And we often, when an advisor is joining Raymond James, particularly if they're coming out of a bank, full service brokerage firm, they're often the idea of being on the more independent side, being an independent contractor, or even having their own dealer, is appealing to them potentially down the road. But they want to move from a corporate employee model to a corporate employee model, kind of settle in there, and then have the ability to continue to move along that continuum over time. And we're happy to be able to provide that to people, to allow them to do that. Sometimes they move, as you've described. Sometimes they say, you know what, where I am, I'm quite happy, and I think I'm just going to stay here for a bit, and that's okay too. The other thing I'd say, we've done a white paper called "What's Your Best Fit," which is really about exactly this, helping advisors make sure they give consideration to sort of all their options in full. And that's on our Choice of Top Advisors website if advisors want to have a look at that.
Make sure there's a link in the write-up that accompanies this video.
Perfect.
I think that was our first white paper too. That was a really important sort of starting point, and has gained a lot, has been downloaded many times as advisors kind of go through this exercise on their own. Well, this has been great. I've learned a couple of things through this as well, and so I hope our audience is able to take away a couple of tidbits and find this useful and sort of help them with their own decision making. It's a big decision, right? It's a business decision, and it's one that a weighty business decision takes. Requires a fair amount, fair investment of time, and ultimately it's worth it. I did like your phrasing, using the words optionality as well, and so a platform like ours preserves optionality for advisors in the industry. Any last thoughts?
No, I would say, like your point, I think there is a lot to talk about. I think talking to other advisors is really the key thing to do, just to make sure you've got a full perspective, and the ability to learn from others' mistakes, what they would do differently if they were doing it all over again. All of those things can be quite important. And in that, What's Your Best Fit, we've got a number of advisors that have either moved affiliation options over time, and so there's advisor ideas of people you can connect with in there. Or we're obviously happy to connect people as well to other advisors if they're looking to kind of have that conversation and make sure they've got the full picture.
Well, this has been great. Scott, I very much appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining me. And so again, Jamie Coulter here, CEO of Raymond James, joined by Scott Hudson, Executive Vice President and Head of Wealth Management in Canada. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it.